Seasons change, we don't stay the same. If we grow, we gotta feel the pain. Seasons change, we don't stay the same. If we grow, we gotta feel the pain. Everything ain't gonna stay the same. Life is crazy, but the love remains. Seasons change, we don't stay the same. If we grow, we gotta feel the pain. Everything ain't gonna stay the same. Life is crazy, but the love remains. For many years, I've flown through big weather. I've seen the stars and never my eyes straight on the never. Ain't worried about no fight. I'm just a brand new flight. Figures I know my life.
All right. Hey, good morning, Grayson.
Good morning, Darcy.
How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Back in Atlanta for a little bit. I've been in East Tennessee in my hometown for the majority of the pandemic because there's like 8 cases in that county as a whole, coronavirus cases, that is. I'm sure there's a lot more brief cases and other kinds of cases, but coronavirus cases in particular, there's very few. So it's good to be back for a little bit. And I'm also seeing if I can get her in the frame. Also watching my brother's dog Waffle. She's taken her daily hourly nap. So it's been very nice to have a dog to keep me company. So I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
Good. I'm doing well. Thank you. Thanks for asking. I'm so excited to get to connect. This time for me has really been characterized by just this grief and gratitude really going hand in hand. And so all that is going on, all the closeness to death and violence that we're seeing is horrendous. And it's reminding me daily just how to be grateful and where to place that that rejuvenating gratitude. So yeah. Well, I'm so glad to welcome you. I said that already, but we've been doing, it's 9 a.m. Just the
Exactly.
normal time to be up pre-coronavirus.
Right.
So at Park Avenue, we have been doing interviews on Wednesdays and just trying to connect and sort of as an extension of our open pulpit. And I know that we have wanted you to come in and preach with us. And so I thought of you particularly in this month's conversations. This is the last one, but we are talking about what I'm calling pride theology. And I'm trying to take us perhaps back to and I think this is one of the reasons why I thought of you is that I see that as intimately tied with Black liberation, and that there is no liberation for queer folk without liberation of Black folks. And so in this month where we're celebrating Pride and Juneteenth and grieving the loss of Rayshard Brooks and so many more people.
Right.
How can folks like you and I, clergy, white folks, queer folks,
Mhm.
really emphasize and make clear how anti-racism is portrayed through theology, right? So,
Mm.
Grayson, I'm so excited to have you here. I hope that I know that our conversation is going to be great, but I
Mhm.
hope that you're doing well in many different ways. So,
I
will
am.
you introduce yourselves to those people that might not know you, or maybe haven't connected with you in a while?
Yeah.
Who sends you? Where are you from? What are you covering?
Well, the spirit sends me at all times. Um, but I'm currently in Atlanta. I live in Midtown, and I'm very grateful. It's one of the things I'm grateful for and happy for. I love walking, love trees, and to be in Midtown means you're in proximity to both of those things. So I'm very grateful for that. But I'm from Jefferson City, Tennessee, which is a small town in what I like to call Dolly country. We're only about 40 minutes away from Dolly Parton's birthplace. So I grew up seeing her massive visage on billboards and going to Dollywood. So the fact that Dolly is as amazing as I would hope she would be is one of the joys of my life, because I can't separate her from my upbringing. And I would say that even if I weren't a white Appalachian gay. Um, but the fact that I am just makes it all the sweeter. So I'm from Jefferson City. My pronouns are he, him, his. Probably should have started with that. And I am starting my third year. Wow. Third year Master of Divinity with a concentration in Christian social ethics at Mercer University's McAfee School of Theology. It's a mouthful. And that is also here in Atlanta. So I'm very excited about that. And I'm also a Stassen Scholar with Dr. David Gushee. So the fact that we're talking about anti-racism, particularly from a perspective of white people endeavoring to be allies, working to be allies, is pretty prescient, because that's a lot of what Dr. Gushee is emphasizing right now as well. So there's a lot of resonances that I'm excited about. Yeah, I'm just happy to be here. It's been a while, and I'm also with the faith community. That's the church that I'm with, which is why I'm not with Park Ave, because my attentions are elsewhere. And that is a small church plant here in the Atlanta area. A lot of similar goals, a lot of similar processes and postures as Park Ave. So I like to think of it as, even though I'm not in the building at Park Ave, I'm still doing the work of Park Ave. So I'm happy to be doing it literally right now.
Yes, and we definitely consider the faith community a partner in this, and a brainstorming companion in this journey of how do we recreate church that really does deconstruct structures and really does bring together movements. And I love all that you guys are about, and I think it's a really creative, wonderful space. So
Right back at you.
we're glad that we get to share you a little too.
Oh, yes.
So
There's enough of me to go around, despite my diminutive frame.
um yes, I just have wonderful memories flashing through my brain of you at Pride. So
It
thank
was a
you for
wonderful
that.
time.
um
And I'm wearing the pink shorts, by the way. I couldn't do this interview without you wearing the pink shorts. So rest assured.
Amazing, amazing. I'm glad that you really did mention the what you're wearing on the bottoms, because who knows what I'm wearing. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh.
No, but I just think it's hilarious the ways that we have coped with the Zoom world. I have like a
I
blazer.
know.
So I have just like this front little office, quote unquote, which is really just like an enclosed porch. And I have a blazer that sits right over there. So if I'm like getting on something that I need to look some kind of way, I just pop on the blazer and then I'm appropriate. So yes.
There's something really queer about that. I can't put my finger on it, but it just, that, I don't know. That's
Hmm.
for another podcast. But that just seems like a queer postcard. I don't know.
I love that. Yes. Oh, speaking of, and you've probably read this theologian. I have not read them yet. But I someone just quoted to on social media this amazingly expansive definition of queerness, and I was like,
Hmm.
where is that from? And it's from this theologian who wrote a book called Cruising Utopia, the then and there of queer futurativity, which I was
Mm.
like, oh my goodness, this sounds
Did Keith
amazing.
share that on social media?
No, I think it was
Oh,
Reverend who you said Keith?
yeah,
No,
because I think
no,
he's read that book.
it wasn't Keith, who is a major influence on me and theologian in my life, but it was Robin Henderson Espinoza.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to learn how to say first. I think it's futurity,
Hmm.
futurity. Anyway, I want to be a theologian that gets to make up words too.
Me too.
Okay. I feel like I'm chatting too much, but let's get down to business.
Let's do it and defeat the Huns.
Exactly. I think with this one conversation we could possibly correct, hundreds of years of theology that has failed to connect. So let's get to work.
And if anyone's going to do it, it's the white saviors. So I'm glad we're in this conversation. It's about
Hashtag
time.
hashtag we're trying to get our folks.
Right. That's it.
Because this has been clear to many. Um,
Hmm.
so yes, let's talk about, and I think it goes so well with the work of the faith community and the work of Park
Hmm.
Avenue Baptist Church to really connect with how our how well, maybe we can start at the beginning. I don't
Let's
know.
do it.
How do you see um the ways in which an inclusive theology, as we kind of studied it, and I know it's been a little bit since I've been out of seminary, but um as I studied it at that point, how it's sort of left out, um connecting with Black liberation. um
Mm.
have you seen that, or have you witnessed that, let's say in practice? um I'm just
So
thinking, yeah, go ahead,
yeah.
sorry.
So essentially, you're asking, what I'm hearing is how has LGBTQ inclusive theology left out Black liberation theology in particular?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, that's a good point. And I think it's something that I'm continually waking up to. But I think where that idea becomes tangible to me is whenever people ask me for whether they're LGBTQ themselves or their allies trying to, as you said, get their folks. Um, that when I share resources of like, here's what I like to call LGBTQ apologetics. Like, here is the case for why it's okay for us to exist, which is necessary. I'm glad those books exist, but off the top of my head, and I could, be missing some. I haven't been reading those for a while because you can only read the same argument, so many times before you've got it pretty much memorized. But most of them, if not all of them, are written by cisgender white gay men. I'm thinking Matthew Vines, Justin Lee, Gene Robinson, or allies. And I'm very grateful they've done that. This is not a knock against them, but I think it is an indictment of the culture at large, and I think the progressive Christian culture, that we don't view the struggle for liberation as intersectional, interwoven as it is. We see it as, all right, let's talk about and particularly talking about the white church. Let's talk about how to include more Black people. Oh yeah, we also need to include Hispanic people. Okay, we'll do that too. Maybe we'll do like a week on that, and then we'll address the LGBTQ question, or if they are even far along enough to say that, or the gay question, whatever. And so I think it is seen as, this is one issue over here, one issue over here, one issue over here, and it's not viewed as two lanes on the same road to freedom. It's seen as like different interstates going in vastly different directions. And as long as, we've read the book and we've put the rainbow flag out, or have at least a few gay people that we don't actively discriminate against in our church, then, we've done that work, and we can sit and have a glass of lemonade and rock on the porch and just be like, all right, we've done it. Like that, that's our thing. And that we can just do the racism stuff. I mean, we're not racist, but we can do the racism stuff. And I just think that there's so much to say about why that might be. But I think it is maybe because of proximity. Maybe it's because, like my mom, for example, she birthed a gay child, and that allowed her to empathize with LGBTQ people in a way that she couldn't have naturally birthed someone outside of her race or her class or whatever social delineations. And so I think it speaks to how the church needs to actively cultivate empathy beyond that which looks like or is in proximity to them. And unfortunately, I would imagine there are more Matthew Vineses and Justin Lees and Gene Robinsons in a lot of white churches than there are Pamela R. Lightseas or James Baldwins or Audre Lordes. And so there's still that degree of discomfort that a lot of white churches aren't willing to engage with.
Wow, you said so much in that. And I think, yes, to all of it. Let me break it down a little bit, at least from what I heard, because that was so
It was a lot.
comprehensive. You are such a theologian. I mean, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you
I'm
for taking
also,
my mess of a question, you just throw this out there, and making something very, very comprehensive, I would say. The first
I'm
thing
also
that
a white male extrovert, so I also have a lot of just societal sanction for just talking.
Well, I got a lot out of what you were saying, and this
Good.
is, this is the spot to do that, right? You have been asked to be in an interview, so you're not taking any space, and that's one of the things I love about you, though. And I try to model that as well, is like, how much space am I taking up? What is what is my privilege that I'm exerting in this situation? So thank you for saying that and modeling that, even in an interview where it's like we're talking to Grayson, Hester. But the first thing that really struck me, that I would love to delve into in your responses, and it seems so obvious, right? If churches could be more intersectional, or recognized, or maybe even like in their own theology, right, in the interpretation of the word, could be more intersectional, then it might be more obvious the interconnectivity of so many layers of oppression, right? And so, yeah, how does and I think in our faith communities, the faith community and Park Avenue Baptist Church,
right,
there is a level of intersectionality that happens intentionally, and because there are so many different voices. How would a church that does have one main sort of theological voice, and we know disproportionately that would in this situation of a predominantly white church be a white male, in the situation of a black church would predominantly be predominantly black church would be a black male. How does one voice from the pulpit, begin to see a spectrum of interconnection and overlapping ways of being and needs for for liberation. I mean,
Yeah.
you're the expert. I
Of
I don't mean to
course.
put you on the spot. I just feel like you could wax poetic on everything.
Well, you can only wax so long before the candle burns out. So I hope that doesn't happen during the interview.
Oh, I've been doing candle making.
Have you?
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
I've been making
Oh, are
prayer
you going to
candles
sell
for
it?
folks. No. I've just been giving them to people kind of
Okay.
as like a self-care thing.
Well, I would love one if you're willing.
Candle. Oh, how long are you in town? I
This
don't
might
mail
be
them.
the
No.
okay. Probably for another 2 weeks or so, I think.
Oh, good. Good. Yeah, let's connect. I would love to. We've been making
Okay.
like natural bug sprays and doing hand sanitizer, and just we're
Oh,
makers over here
I
at
love
the
it.
Garrett House. But yeah, so how does even one begin to recognize crafting and intersectional oppression? if
Yeah.
if we sit in a position of privilege, and maybe you can answer this even just from your own experience of
Mhm.
of that unveiling, right? That Du Bois talks about. When
Mm.
how can a white person, you know, begin to even unpack all that is there? And I guess this conversation is going around a lot. We're not talking about reading White Fragility, we're talking
Mhm.
about I think in a faith setting, how does that begin to even enter the conversation? I guess
Yeah.
intentionality, but yeah.
Yeah. So I want to zero in on your use of the word unveiling. And I'm assuming by Du Bois you meant W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yes.
Okay. I hadn't heard that from him before, but just wanted to make sure.
Well,
Um,
yeah, I'm
I,
sorry. I kind of adapted um,
mhm.
the veil, and then I sort of made it into a verb, unveiling.
Awesome. Well, I think it's really it speaks to something that you did that, because the literal word or the literal meaning of apocalypse is unveiling. And so I think, while we could make jokes about 2020 being the end of the world, and if it's not this, then what is it? But it is, as REM sang all those years ago, it is the end of the world as we know it. And that's what I said. My roommate and I, when I first caught wind that Mayor Bottoms would be closing the city, and I wasn't sure if that would include grocery stores. Just no one was sure of anything.
Hmm.
My roommate and I drove to Kroger blasting "It's the end of the world as we know it," and just laughing in the morose and ironic way that millennials have become so good at. But I think there does need to be an end of the world as people of privilege, whether that's male privilege, cisgender privilege. And so, of course, we're talking, you and I, specifically about white privilege. But as you noted, a predominantly Black church would most likely be led by a Black cisgender straight male who has, in that context, a lot of privilege. And so when we have these privileges, I think it really does require an apocalypse. There's me and my southernness, an apocalypse of some sort, where you and I don't think it can just be, as you noted, reading White Fragility, which is on my bookshelf and I look forward to reading. But it
Right.
can't just be one thing. I think even this Western binary mentality of compartmentalization and bifurcation, either ors, that same mentality which leads people to so strictly delineate these categories that we mentioned: LGBTQ justice, Black justice, you have theology, womanist theology, all these things. I think it's the same mentality that convinces people of privilege that to do one thing that creates an emotion we're not accustomed to feeling, and indeed are rewarded for not feeling, is huge. And it might be for somebody who's never read a book about Black liberation or LGBTQ liberation or both. It's going to be a big deal but we can't mistake feeling like we've done something for actually doing something. And so I think the reason why the book of Revelation, not shun, is so long and in detailing an apocalypse is because an apocalypse is multifaceted. As we see, it wasn't simply the murder of George Floyd, which sent millions of people internationally to the streets. It was back to back to back to back high profile police murder of Black people, a Black woman, Black man, Black trans man, and then Black man Rayshard Brooks in the week since. It was coronavirus. It was just the continual decline and unveiling of the amoral void where Trump's soul should be. And I think it's just all of these different things are creating an apocalypse for a lot of people, which is why in positions of privilege, it can't simply be reading a book, because you can hold really smart ideas really stupidly. You can say, I've read this book, I've done this thing, but then on the flip side, it can't simply be proximity either, because that can lead to tokenization, that can lead to gentrification, that can lead to a lot of dehumanizing practices. And I think people forget that throughout at least US American history, like slave owners were very approximate to a lot of Black people, and rich white people were very close in proximity to the Black people that they hired to take care of their children or to clean their houses or to do the remedial jobs at whatever business. So it can't simply be proximity, because if you're not marrying that with knowledge, then you're just treating them with like sanitized dehumanization. You're treating them with the nice version of racism. And so I think it requires proximity. I think it requires something shocking you out of it. I wish it didn't, but I think so often it does. And I think it requires knowledge. I think it requires relationship, listening. It's so multifaceted, because an apocalypse requires an apocalyptic response. And I think we just need to do more with our unveiling than kissing the bride after we take off the veil. Like, unveiling is a much longer process than what I think we think of it in general straight whatever culture. I don't know what the straights are up to, but I've heard they do that.
Yes, well, and I appreciate you moving it to the conversation of of apocalypse and what that means. That's the language we've been using recently too, and I do see, and I love how you kind of built into what could be, causing all of this. And I look at it, even because I'm a visual artist, I look at it
Mhm.
in the reflection and cultural shifts that I've seen. And I don't know if you've heard this quote before, so I'll read it. Frederick
Mhm.
Jameson, who's this philosopher, you might have read him more than I have, but
Actually haven't heard of him, so thank you for teaching
oh,
me.
okay. Well, it's older, but he popularized the idea that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. And he says that this is a result of some dirge or some weakness in our own imaginations.
Mhm.
But I think about it in terms of like the things that we've seen, and I'm a Gen Xer, but I definitely am like in at the end of Gen X and in close proximity to
Mhm.
a lot of millennials that you mentioned, like a dark sense of humor. And I think that that might arise from this idea that for as long, for our formative years, we have only been able to imagine the end of the world, right? I
Mhm.
love dystopian fiction,
Yeah.
right? And I think that has been captured in so much of pop culture.
Mhm.
And so perhaps that was the imagining the end of the world as sort of an easier cop out to wait, what is the next evolution, right? And I think
Mm.
that's why there aren't a lot of churches that are that are achieving this next evolution, or even, societally thinking of what is post a police state, which is what we're in right now,
Mm.
right? What is
Mhm.
post commodification of bodies, which is capitalism, and so I don't know, any thoughts about that as it relates to the apocalypse and this unveiling, as it's
Mhm.
happening now?
That's a that's a big quote. That's why when you said it, I was just like, whoo. Because yeah, like you don't really see like The Walking Dead isn't a show about socialist utopia or communist utopia or whatever economic system people subscribe to
Or
other
the
than
new
other
one,
than
right?
capitalism. Right, the new economic system. Although it is interesting, and this is somewhat tangential, but a lot of zombie movies, particularly those when George Romero made Night of the Living Dead, I think it was 1969. That was his way of critiquing capitalism. So much of
Mhm.
zombie movies are about how commodification of bodies results in us being nothing more than consumers and mindless, brainless, all of these very dark adjectives. So I think in imagining the end of the world, we, like the quote said, we are imagining the end of the world, um, of a world that capitalism brought us to,
Right.
um,
Right.
and all
Exactly.
these other all these other things are bringing us to, hopefully not, but are would bring us to if that is what happens. Um, and so I think it really, so back to the specific context of Christianity, creating inclusive theology, LGBTQ liberation, Black liberation, all these things. Um, I think churches tend to have very limited imaginations in general, in the
Mm.
sense that the end of the world is a reality where so many strains of evangelical theology outsource all work, all feeling, all humanity, really, because it's like, oh, well, we're going to leave anyway. So let's not really worry about this because all it matters is having the individual, personal relationship with your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. And getting the soul saved for that time that we know is coming, but we don't know when it is. But don't worry about that. It's going to happen. Whether it is when you die or um, when the end of the world is, the apocalypse, whatever, Jesus comes back. Um, and so I think that betrays and reveals a lack of imagination, because it's really like a sentence that's just a period is no sentence worth reading. Yet so much of Christian theology focuses solely on the punctuation mark, where it's like, let's just think about the punctuation mark, the period, the exclamation point, not the question mark. Don't do that, but the period or the exclamation point. And that's beside the point. We need to be beside that point because, like, yeah, I
Well,
just
and is
think,
it a measure of privilege to be able to say, this life means nothing per se? The important
yes.
life is to come. And I think that could only really be believed um, or important to someone who in this life has a measure of comfort,
Mm-hmm.
privilege, maybe status, maybe, um, or even just enough. So
Right.
it's not the folks who are in, let's say, let's shorthand it to say like chronic pain, whatever kind of pain that is. I want to
Mm-hmm.
include, be inclusive in that concept.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of real easy, and I mean, you're talking about the birth of liberation theology in general, right? The idea that we're going to move beyond the end, let's say, which just sounds sounds backward, but beyond the end to say the now is important, right? um
Yeah.
I loved how you said there, a sentence that is a period is no sentence at all. You're just a poet.
Oh, well, thank you. As much you're the visual person, I'm the word person, but try to make me do visual art and nothing much happens. But I
Let me
think
get at you.
too, I think too, and this is something I'm just sort of putting together right now. So I don't think it's a fully formed thought, but there is a sense in which, I'm thinking about like my Appalachian coal miner heritage. I don't know enough about my ancestry, but I do know enough to know that while I myself didn't live a stereotypically Appalachian life, many of my ancestors did. And so there is a sense in which at one time, to live in abject poverty, to live in chattel slavery, to live in these seemingly impenetrable realities means that this life does matter, but the only hope for succor, the only hope for restoration is in the next. So I think it could be viewed as maybe, and again, I'm thinking through this, so correct me if this is just blah, but maybe
No, this
it's
is a space for
like,
this. I love it.
maybe it's it the extremes. Like if we're going to use a spectrum, like there is a sense in which, or maybe it's a graph where it's like in one corner there is this life matters, but the very saying my life matters is defiant to this system, this reality that tells me in every way possible that it doesn't matter. And so because this life matters, I'm going to invest this hope into the great hereafter, or the by and by, or the circle that's unbroken, whatever it is. So much Appalachian hymnody speaks to, I can't wait till I die because this sucks. But then
Right,
on
the
the other
pie in the
side,
sky.
exactly, which has served its purpose and I would imagine continues to. But then you have people who have the pie and who are polluting the sky, who then say, oh, no, this doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. It's all about what's happening over there. So I think when that theology becomes abusive and becomes ignorant, literally ignoring, is when it's married to a privilege that could do something about it. That I think is when it becomes anti-liberation, because heaven, for me at least, I'll speak for me, I don't know what heaven is. No one does. But I like to think about a great hereafter, a by and by, a pie in the sky, where I get to meet my grandmother who I never met in person, old Geraldine McGuire. Because that gives me hope and that gives me sustenance and something to work towards in the here and now. So it's like a queer melding of like the already not yet, that paradox that is pretty popular. So I think you have what is known as the over-realized eschatology and the under-realized eschatology, where a lot of people are all about the not yet. Well, this is just not yet, not yet, not yet. But of course, justice delayed is justice denied, as MLK said. But then you have people who can't be but in the already, because hell is already here and heaven is the only way to fathom making it through another layer of whatever Dante is cooking up next. So I think it's a matter of, and if we're going to talk about queerness, I think it's a matter of embracing those paradoxes and not fleeing to the extremes if we have the presence of mind and are not so, not distracted, but belabored by these chronic pains that you mentioned. That was a beautiful way of putting it. if we are seeking to and with people of privilege, we have to learn to live in these paradoxes, live in these tensions, where we can live here but also know that there's something else, and let the one of the other inform the other, and not allow despair to creep in by thinking this is it, like there's no hope, there's nothing behind the curtain, nothing more going on here. And I think as Christians, most of us, I'm sure there are some who disagree, but most of us, I think, would want to believe that there is something else. There is a divine, a spirit, a heaven, however you frame it. But we also can't treat heaven as a timeshare and just like, oh, I can't wait to get done with work because, on Friday I get to go to my beach house and get to just ignore all the problems and, go to the gated community heaven that somehow magically looks exactly like the gated community I currently live in, which keeps people out more than it keeps me in. And so it's really just about melding and making music out of that tension.
Yes, I love that. And I think, coming back to a balance,
Mhm.
being able, and I think we're really interested and into on Park Ave right now, these tenets of systems that uphold white supremacy. And one of the tenets is that there is only one truth, that there is only
Mm.
one way to be right. And so I think it as a way of deconstructing what might be the result of thousands of years of Socratic methodology, that, well, there's one way, and it's like,
Right.
fact, multiple things can be true at once. I can simultaneously be hopeful for what God has, and I think it's like a great union, kind of like what you said with your ancestors. I think of it on like a soulful level of just never feeling apart, and perhaps like
Mm.
actually being joined. And so
Mm.
and whole, I think. And that's kind of just my image. I'm a heretic.
Yeah.
But but that can be simultaneously like what I'm hoping for and looking forward to, and I can struggle for liberation right now. So
Absolutely.
bodies, heavenly bodies, and the end possibly, is important, and the now is important. And
Absolutely.
and in so many ways, I think that does tie back to intersectionality, right? And the
Mhm.
realities of many different modes and forces that are pressing upon different folks.
Mhm. And
Let's oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, I loved what you said about the heaven thing. So if you don't mind, I'd like to expand on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. We're just
Okay.
no, no
Okay.
itinerary here on this journey.
Yeah, I've been thinking about, and this will tie back to, I think the founding question, of what is incumbent on white queer people, white people in general, people of privilege. Why is it incumbent on us to not bifurcate and compartmentalize so much about, or maybe at all, maybe, when it comes to LGBTQ liberation and Black liberation and all liberation. And so that ties to how I've come to think about heaven, which maybe is just, although the Good Place finale is maybe shifting me away from what I was thinking, because it's one of the more beautiful representations of the afterlife that I've ever
I
seen.
haven't seen it. Should I
Oh
watch
my
it?
God. Oh, yes. The Good Place is my
Really?
favorite comedy show of all time. It's the best.
Ooh, I take that very seriously. Sorry, continue.
Well, thank you. um, so yeah, so the Good Place is one thing that I'm marinating on, but what I think about is, like you said, somewhat of a union, where when we get to heaven, when the saints come marching in and we're part of that number, then I think I arrived at this as a means of trying to reconcile how I don't believe in hell, but I want to believe in justice, and I don't want to believe in a heaven that allows people who do terrible things in life, which is all of us. We are all sinners. We're all, and to make it a social gospel, we're all complicit in these systems of white supremacy. We're all proximate to them to various degrees. We've all hurt people simply by driving our cars and buying our groceries and using our phones, all of those things. Like, I will have plenty to atone for simply for being a person who lives and breathes in a capitalist world. Amen. But then, I don't think
You're such a Baptist.
hallelujah. But then I don't think it's also responsible to continue in that narrative that a lot of, at least I heard growing up, of like, all sins are equal in God's sight. So, a gay man holding another man's hand is as evil in God's sight as somebody murdering somebody. I don't think that's the case. Clearly, I think it's okay for a gay man to hold another one's hand, but no more than that. Kidding. But
images of you at Pride 2 years ago in my brain.
Right. If I ever run for office, those will certainly surface. But yeah, I think so. In an effort to like really just harmonize that and be like, okay, so I don't believe in an eternal hell where punishment is, where we treat the cosmology like we treat the prison industrial complex, where it's like you do something wrong once and then you're off to eternal punishment. But I also don't want it to be that, Donald Trump gets to heaven and it's all okay. Like, you're forgiven. Here are the millions of people whom you harmed, and we're all just dancing around a maypole happy. So my own attempt to rectify that was, reconcile that, I should say, is that I think when we get to heaven, that it will be the true union, like you said, it will be the true community, which means that all of these systems and structures that have been created for necessity, like we need some kind of society, we need some kind of organization. It's the way nature works. Our bodies are systems, the world is a system, but it is so often either created with malintent or injected at some point, with dehumanizing policies and dehumanizing structures and dehumanizing beliefs,
and maybe created just simply without people in mind. So one person cannot have, and I think this is like the structures of our churches, one person cannot have all viewpoints. Right. Sorry.
Right.
Keep going.
And no, you're right. And it speaks to what you said. How can one voice in the pulpit? I kind of skated by that, but how can one voice in the pulpit reach that conclusion?
Right.
They can't, because even if the pastor, as I think pastors have a greater chance of doing, even if the pastor believes something, if the church doesn't, or the domination doesn't, or the less tangible culture doesn't, then they're muted or they're endangered, or so they can't. It needs to be a communal effort. It needs to be a collective effort. And that goes back to how I view heaven, where like, if all of these structures fall away, all of these structures that allow me as a white middle class cisgender man to walk down the street and see a person experiencing homelessness, which is like the apex of all of these underlying failed systems. That's where like I interact with the abject total failure of all of our societal systems to care for someone, to care about someone. And if I can see that person and have to work to find empathy for them, have to work to see them as human, because so often I just walk on by. And that to me speaks to how dehumanized I have become because of whiteness and because of capitalism and because of maleness and all of these things that I have internalized that make me better. And so I can see somebody who is my fellow human and who I am specifically called to attend to and take care of because of the Christ person that I claim to follow. And I can just see that and be like, well, that's just the way it is. That's sad, and just keep walking. And so I believe that heaven will be all of these structures fall away and we're all in this union, and I will feel the brunt, the totality of all of the pain that I have either done nothing about, that I have actively caused, and that will be my judgment. And but that is the process through which we have restored community. That's the process by which forgiveness, reconciliation, repentance, naming, and all of these things, that it's not suffering for its own sake, it's suffering to then be in restored community. And so I think then it's proportional. So when our favorite evil placeholder, Hitler, I believe Hitler's in heaven, but I believe Hitler has been through a lot, an unimaginable amount of psychological, emotional pain because of the unimaginable physical pain he has continues to cause, honestly, to millions, if not billions of people. And maybe that will take billions of years of torture for him to then be in restored community. And so why I say all of that is because I like that idea of heaven where we all suffer to be eventually one. But it also speaks to what the work we need to be doing pre-heaven now is thinking, okay, I am both a victim and a victimizer, as Ibram X. Kendi said, when I am white, when I choose to be white. And I think I need to realize, as all white people do, that if we only focus on one of our biases, then we're not attending to all of our death that resides within us. We're only attending to the one bias and the one system that we are awakened to, then we're leaving rot unattended. And so I think why we need to work on our homophobic biases. Me too. I've internalized homophobia. I am working on it every day. Loving myself is an act of anti-homophobia, and others. But why we need to do what I believe heaven will be, which is that discomfort, which is that guilt, productive guilt, not like white guilt, as in like I'm irreconcilably bad and you need to feel bad for me, but like, oh shit,
Right.
this
Not
is
making it
like,
about me. Right.
exactly. Like I think you
Mhm.
need to feel some guilt, but
Well, and
not in a way.
that's where I would love to dig in, is to say, so I assume that you're having a similar experience at this time, in terms of folks who sort of have known me for years, who are white folks, are reaching out and they're like, oh my God,
Yeah,
and feeling, guilt, right? I think there's, there's productive white guilt, and then there's, a white guilt that we can just kind of ignore and move to the next thing. And right now in this unveiling, we're unable to ignore, right? Or
right,
maybe let's say more people are unable to ignore. So
right.
are you having the same experience as me? Because I know, and I'm just having known you for the time that I have, I know you to be living an active anti-racist life. And
Well,
so
thank you.
for me, thank you. Well, and thank you for the work, right? And for me, um, you know, that's been one of my goals, as in my clergy journey and calling, is to say, if I'm not saying where I stand, then because of the skin that I occupy, that is where I stand, right? And so
Right,
uh,
right.
and so to be outspoken about it is what has to be. So anyway, folks have been
Yeah.
coming to me and saying, oh my gosh, so how do you do this, and what is it, and again, resources are great. Resources are
Hmm.
necessary. You
Hmm.
mentioned Ibram X, and I'm forgetting his last name. I have
Kendi,
Kendi, thank you.
Yep,
Kendi.
Kendi.
NDI. Mhm. And I've been referring a lot of folks to the work um of Resma Menachem. And yes. So I love this idea of this period, right? The eschaton being a moment for working on oneself. And maybe that's a part of like seeing oneself clearly, if that makes
Mm,
sense. um tell me, there's so much you could talk about in there. Tell me if if you had this similar experience with folks also. um let's talk more about this. First of all, I love restorative justice and restorative circles and the work that has to happen in those spaces.
mhm,
And so much of that, I think, is about seeing ourselves for who we are and the space that we
mm.
truly occupy. Yes, I'm sorry. Keep going. I just had to like
No, you're
interject.
good. No, I appreciate that because I can, as an extrovert, I will create thoughts by talking the thoughts. And so sometimes it's very good for people to be like, oh, let's come back.
Exactly.
um,
No, me too.
yeah. So I appreciate that. Um, I actually haven't had too many people reach out to me, which is interesting. It's not, I think I'm likable, so I don't think it's because people are turned off by me.
Of course you
But
are.
um, what my experience has more so been people, both white and black, reaching out to me and being like, look what this person did, or like, look at this video. Um, so I really, and I'm glad people are doing that, are reaching out to you and asking for resources. I don't think one experience is right and the other wrong, but it's just interesting. I haven't really thought about like, yeah, like I've had a couple of white friends just continue the dialogue, or like do, I think, as white people should do, and be like, look what this idiot said, let's talk about it. And but also I've had some black friends of mine just be like, hey, look at this, what do you think? um so yeah, that's just interesting. I appreciate that contrast.
Well, I will
um
send some your way. I'll be like, you know who you should just sit with
Please.
wealth,
I mean,
really, of
if
knowledge
you are
and
overwhelmed,
context.
um and I love that we can share this knowledge, because you've mentioned a
And
couple
don't,
of
yeah, just to say out there, I am not frustrated at all by that. I think that type
right.
of interaction is important, and
Absolutely.
we need to, white folks, be doing the work together to move toward a deeper understanding and restorative work. Mhm.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. And I think, and I'm glad that these white people are reaching out to you, as opposed to, a unless they have a long relationship of trust with a black person, where it's understood that this isn't like, please do my emotional work, please do all of this for me. Because I have a, like Christian Smith, for example, at the faith community, I can ask him certain questions because we have a longer trust filled relationship, and he knows where I'm coming from and I him. But so often it's like, oh, Cindy that I work with, she's black. What do you think?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and it's like, this is Saturday, I don't want to talk to you, or whatever. So I'm glad they're talking to you. And I am happy when people ask me, and I don't want it to seem like I know everything. I don't want it to seem like
No,
I'm not
no,
constantly
you don't
working
seem
on
that
this as
way.
okay, good,
Right,
myself.
no.
Because I think
And
white
I hope I
people can
don't seem that way.
often, I don't get that sense. Um, because I think sometimes white people can turn anti-racism into yet another meritocracy, where
Thank
it's
you.
like, where it's like, I learned 2 weeks ago what abolish the police is, and if you don't also say abolish the police, then I guess you're the bad person that I'm afraid myself to be, so I'm going to project that onto you.
Well, yeah, and and
um
and I think that's the commodification of
right.
a rhetoric or anti-racism in general, right? And so we saw how slavery um morphed into
Hmm.
mass incarceration, and literally folks that are imprisoned are able to be used in this very similar way as
Right.
during chattel slavery. And so let us not let anti-racism and good talk, good praying turn into another way that folks can be that we can commodify and and thus, let's say, morph something that
Right.
is is meant for liberation toward
And
just another layer.
right. And I think that's a very good point. And I don't like to be the person that's like, it's all social media's fault. But I think a way in which social media can contribute to that is the way in which it is still commodified. It's not dollars and cents, it's likes and retweets.
Right.
And
Yeah, I had
so,
somebody in a group recently ask the question. It was actually during the protest chaplains training, which
mhm.
I think anyway, you would be great in. Um they said, you know, if there were no social media, how would you and history know which side you're on right now?
Mm,
And I think that that is a poignant question.
that
And I've
is
seen that on many protest signs, you know, white folks retweets and sharing articles is not enough, right?
right.
Can I
And
bring up one more point?
yeah,
Oh, sorry. You're
you
just
go.
you're so rich with the, I mean, we just need to like have a monthly meeting where we can talk,
I'd
because
love it.
you're sparking so many ideas in me, and it's just lovely. Um, One thing I was thinking of just as we talk about the work of anti-racism,
Mhm,
I love the metaphor, and I think Resma Menachem uses it, or maybe it was, anyway, the image of white supremacist ideals and as a disease, as a
mhm.
thing that we need to recover from. And for me, that's my native that's my native language. I'm in recovery. That's very much the way that
Oh
my
yeah.
own journey toward some level of self-actualization has happened, is through recovery, right?
Okay.
And so thinking about anti-racism and the work of white folks as recovering from an addiction, I think is really
Mm,
helpful, because if I stop, like right now, let's say I'm like, oh, I'm good, I'm so woke, I'm woke, the woke and wokest. um if I stop now, I will lose what I've gained, let's say, or
wow.
I will once again fall into denial, or let myself fall under the veil, to use Dupont
Right.
before again. Um, yeah, I don't know. I heard that in something that you were just sharing. So
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I haven't heard that metaphor before. I know there's a lot of ways that people, and also congratulations on recovery. I know
oh,
it's a lifelong process, so that's awesome. I don't think I knew that about you. So
oh,
thank you for
thanks.
sharing, and that's wonderful. Um, yeah, and I'm really happy that your own subjectivity, your own life experience allowed you to enabled you to understand this in a way that's meaningful for you in many ways. One way I've thought about it is like water. So having grown up near the Smoky Mountains and in Appalachia, nature really is how I make sense of a lot of things, and it's how I commune with God. It's really important to me. Um, and so I think about it in terms of water, where, you know, water that is in a river. That was a great way of putting it. A river, as the people call it. You know, a river can be violent. It can be like rapids. It can be moving, and unless we harness that, then it is, apart from harnessing it for energy, it can be deadly, right? So like water is what we all need for life. That can also kill us. And so
Hmm.
water, that is constantly moving isn't necessarily life giving. But then water that remains stagnant is also not life giving, because water that sits in puddles and ponds without movement becomes gross and algae ridden and smells bad.
And
But then water,
mosquitoes born there. Sorry.
mosquitoes, yes, yes,
Of
no, it
words.
needed to be mentioned. Um, um, but then water that is captured, right? So like water that is cut in our cupped hands, or in a bottle, or in a windmill, or not, that would be a windmill, a mill.
A mill. Yeah, no, you're good.
A
I
mill.
got you. Don't be so hard on yourself. Your metaphors and your language is so beautiful.
Thank you. I was like, water in a windmill.
You talked about
That's two
heaven
different
as
things.
all of us dancing around a maypole. It was just Beautiful.
Until you see Midsummer, and then it's a little creepy. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, so water in a mill, that is captured and life-giving. And so I think where that to me comes into play in the work for liberation and decentering whatever privileges we hold have been granted, is like we don't need people who are rivers. We don't need people who are gushing and who are just like acting out of this like ecstatic energy all the time, because then that's unsustainable. It's not ultimately life-giving. But we also don't need
And it can't
people
be
who have
intentional.
it can't be intentional, correct?
Mhm.
And that's not to say, I do want to be clear that I'm not condemning people who are acting out of like rage and who are burning things out of that rage, not out of opportunism. Like we need rivers, right? We need them. We need that explosive energy at times. But in order for water to be life-giving, we need it to be captured in something. Same with fire. We need fireplaces. We don't need wildfires, but even those can be life-giving at times. And so I think, if it be that water is the thing that we need to survive, then I think it can be something we model our activism and our lives after. And I think it looks like not letting ourselves become stagnant, because that's when only death comes out of it. But it's also not letting ourselves become over zealous, unsustainably forceful. I think it's again this balance of like, let's capture this life givingness and keep it moving, but also not let it go out of control, and capture it into something that actually provides life to ourselves and to other people.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Again, it's making me think of this tenets of white supremacist systems, um, because one of the things that we talk about in systems, and I think this is important to talk about for churches and nonprofits, because so much of this system that was supposed to be liberative has been upholding white supremacist ways
Right.
of being. And one of them is a sense of urgency that
Mhm.
prevents us from being intentional. And I think, you know, as folks that are trying to do 100 million things and create programs that give life and are healing spaces and brave spaces, that can be the way that we operate from. And I like how you said, you're in that. I'm not saying folks that are filled with rage, right? I think rage
Mhm.
and grief, I see the protest space and the riot and the communal rage that's happening, as pointing toward the fact that we need more spaces, spiritual spaces where people can have emotions and that speak
Mhm.
to our real life experiences. So yeah, I
Yeah.
wow. Talking to you has just really sparked so many new images and ideas in my mind. Have we talked about what we said we were going to talk about? Facebook world?
um can you see
Kind of.
people's comments?
I really just see people on there, so I haven't seen comments
Okay.
per se. Actually, let me
um
go. I could go back to the original
because
one.
they might be like, get to the point.
Where are you going?
um
Perhaps. Oh, I hope that's not happening. Let me check it out. No. I mean, I hope that no one came into this with expectations per se.
I certainly didn't.
I didn't either. I was just like, I want to talk to Grayson. And I do
Aw.
think, yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this interlapping or interwoven, overlapping
There's your
system.
there's your windmill.
Interlapping. No,
Amen.
it's just that we've reached that point where we can make up words.
Exactly. We're in we're that smart and that degreed that we can make up a word and be like, start using this.
I meant to hashtag it TM. But I do think, I do think, yeah, even just to say, Grayson, you are a source of such great knowledge and wealth, and I think that you are a safe and brave space that folks can come to if needed, right? And I love how we kind of spoke to what might be this collective um, grief and groaning, right? But also
Mm,
um, guilt and self-revealing that is necessary in order to
mhm.
grow. And that's kind of why I put that um, Semo. How do you say his name? The
Samo.
song Semo.
It's Thomas backwards.
Yeah,
Samo.
yeah. I'm always
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
it's Thomas backwards. But I that
Yep, me
song has
too.
been my like I don't know, my anthem lately because
Mm,
it says it talks about changing and how that's painful.
yeah.
And so the growth and change that it takes to be in an unveiling is painful and tiring and
Mhm.
I think yeah, I see you doing this work and I yeah, I'm so glad that we got to meet and talk about it and
Me
I'd love to
too.
continue our conversation. And so if people want to hear more from you or want to connect with you, how will we do that? Tell us
Yeah.
in the world.
So like so many others, I have social media. So I have Twitter, where I am on it very sporadically because Twitter is disastrous for my mental health. So I try to use it with strict boundaries. But I am on it at Grayson underscore Hester. I'm on Instagram at Grayson Hester. And then I'm on Facebook, www.facebook.com/GHester15. Um, and I'm not cool enough to be on TikTok. So I'm not on TikTok. And I
I
also
just
don't like
observe
having,
TikTok.
same, I also don't like having the Chinese government in my pocket. So I also don't use, that's my excuse for not using TikTok.
I had no idea. I just like watching
Yeah.
dances.
I mean, I think if you have TikTok, that, we're all being watched no matter what. But the I think, I don't know if this passed, but there was a congressman who was proposing that all U.S. government officials be banned from having TikTok because of the ways in which the Chinese government uses it for data collection.
I had no idea. Wow.
So do with that what you
You're a
will. So I'm
wealth
not
of
cool enough.
knowledge. I feel like I've gotten like show recommendations, life recommendations, some really great imagery. It's just
Well,
lovely.
thank you. So I'm not on TikTok. I don't know why you would need my Snapchat. So yeah, those are the three main social media that I use. And also, while I'm in Atlanta, I love sitting outside to get coffee, and would love to connect in person that way if you're comfortable with it. And email, you can email me. And yeah, but those are the main ways I communicate with people.
Well, thank you. And I know the faith community has a really cool event coming up that you were just telling me about. Do you want to share about that for folks listening?
Yeah, yeah, thank
Since
you.
we didn't quite like marry it the way that I think you and Christian are gonna do in your talk. So I'm gonna watch it.
Yay! So yes, so as the totally planned continuation of this conversation,
We're
the faith
collaborating.
exactly, the faith community, where I serve as communication director. We're a small church plant, and technically we're in Tucker, but right now we're only online. We are having a power and pride worship service this week. So we only do worship once a month, and so we try to do it thematically based on what's going on. And so
And
with
you have it on
June,
Saturdays, is that
mhm,
correct?
correct.
Okay.
So Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time on Facebook Live and YouTube Live, we're having Power and Pride, where I and Christian Smith, who's our pastor, he's a Black cisgender straight male ally. We're going to be having a dialogical sermon. So I will speak, he will speak, go back and forth, which I know Park Ave has done before. And so we're going to be doing it where he's going to be talking about Black power. I'm going to be talking about LGBTQ pride, and then the ways in which what we are leading towards with this conversation, the ways in which those two things are not separate aims, but why both of those movements need each other. And yeah, it's gonna be awesome. I'm excited.
I'm
So
so
again, that's
excited about it. It sounds
this
amazing.
Saturday, 4 o'clock, Facebook Live.
Facebook Live and the faith community.
TFC ATL.
TFC ATL.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, Grayson, thank you. Thanks for taking time. I'm glad to know you're in town. I will be following up with you about my
Okay.
lovely essential oil candle that I'm making.
Yes,
I also have
please.
other little trinkets. I've been just loving to do little giftings for helping folks to center on wellness and our own wellness during this time. So
I
I
love it.
appreciate you so
Thank you so
much.
much.
I want to say that it's happening right now. We have a group that meets on Wednesdays that just gathers and is like a life group together at 10 a.m. And so folks are invited to that. I'm just giving some resources. Worship is Sundays at 10-ish. Um, and and expect Friday an offering from my co-pastor Henry Chenault, who has been doing some really creative offerings in what we're calling reimagining prayer. And so that happens on Fridays. And am I forgetting anything? Oh, this week we have Miles Markham preaching, and I am
Ooh.
so excited to hear Miles. And him and I will be going Facebook Live on Saturday just to say, hey, this is what's going to be going on, or just to check in and say hello. Miles is an incredible theologian and a dear friend, and so I look forward to that on Sunday. I look forward to the faith community on Saturday, 4 p.m. Facebook Live. And I just, yeah, will you do you want to send us with any sending forth
Oh.
thoughts? You don't have
Oh,
to.
so much pressure. No, the Enneagram 3 in me is like, yes, I'm gonna do it better than anyone.
You're a 3. I just had no idea. Oh my gosh. We need to be closer.
I didn't either until recently. My roommate was just casually one day like, you think you're a 7-wing 6, but you're actually a 3-wing 4. And I was like, psh! And now I'm like, yeah.
I thought I was a 7 too, and I am a subtype of a 4 that's called self-preservation 4.
Oh, I need to look into that. Maybe I'm that type. But yeah, closing word. I think so. One thing that I've come to really resonate with is an adaptation of something that James Baldwin, who's my all-time favorite author, it's why I have his picture on my desk.
Yes.
At one point, I forget in which essay, because he wrote so many, but at one point he says, white people, and this is a paraphrase, but white people have the choice to either be white or be irrelevant. And I've come to think of it as, hopefully in a way that's respectful of his work, white people, we have the choice to either be white or be human. And one necessarily cancels out the other. And so I think when we talk about all of this work and all of this work in dismantling white supremacy, which includes dismantling heterosexism, it's not an either or. If you're doing one part of the work, you're doing the work, as it's so popularly known, which is exhausting but also freeing, because it's like, okay, I myself don't know quite as much about capitalism as I should, and I am so uncomfortable with this, but as long as I'm doing this, then I know that I'm ultimately reaching the same aim, and I can come back to this. And so I think this is an invitation to become more human and experience life in a fuller, more polychromatic way, where we've gotten used to seeing art in 1 or 2 shades. And this is an invitation to see the world with all of the colors and all of the shades, including the garish ones, including the painful ones, including the ones that we've been taught to think are ugly. And so, in choosing not to be white in a sociological sense, I can't choose not to be fair skinned as much as the sun and its burning would like me to think I could. But in terms of choosing to be sociologically white, we have an opportunity to be fuller, more empathetic, more abundant humans. And that's essentially what the work of anti-racism and anti-heterosexism, et cetera, is, where it's like, oh, I've been eating candy my whole life and thinking that it's a gourmet meal. This is what food tastes like. At first, it's uncomfortable and our bodies may not accept it, but eventually, it's what it nourishes us and sustains us. And so, in this work, know that there's enough time. You know that you will make mistakes and we can learn from them. Know that no one is doing this perfectly. And if they think that they are, AKA Sean King, then they're probably exploiting somebody. Um,
Shade.
and that
I love it. Your benediction involves shade.
but that there is time enough, and there is love enough, and there is grace enough, and there is we are enough, and that we don't have a choice. We have to do this work, but we can do it in a way that honors ourselves, and in so doing honors other people, and we're just becoming better humans. And that sounds like a great deal to me.
Thank you, Grayson. Wow. Thank you for allowing us
Thank
a space
you.
to become. You're lovely.
Thank you so much. You're lovely
Yeah.
too. Thank you. This has
Well,
been
and
so
thank you.
wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And thank you to everybody who's been watching, and we'll connect offline.
For sure.
All right. Take care. Love you.
Love you too.
Bye.